January 1943, Nazi Germany. In a snowy forest on the outskirts of Berlin, searchers find the body of a 59-year-old widow, Frieda Rössner. She has been strangled with her own scarf. Her clothing is disturbed. From her purse, a single Reichsmark is missing. For a regime obsessed with control, an unsolved sex murder in a Berlin suburb is unacceptable. The Berlin homicide squad sends an SS detective, Heinrich Franz. For weeks, he finds nothing. No weapon, no witness, no clear suspect. Then he arrests a man everyone in Köpenick knows, a mentally disabled laundry delivery boy called Dumb Bruno. He can barely read, struggles with simple numbers, and is known to the police only for clumsy petty thefts. Under interrogation, this frightened, confused man confesses, first to killing Frieda, then to killing other women. By the time the detective is finished, Bruno has admitted to 85 murders over 15 years, all across Germany. On paper, the Nazi police have uncovered the worst serial killer in European history. 1 year later, Bruno is dead, killed by an injection in an SS medical facility in Vienna. No judge ever heard his case. No lawyer ever defended him. Only decades later will investigators go back to the original files and realize something is terribly wrong. There is no solid evidence that he killed anyone. The monster the regime proudly claimed to have caught was, almost certainly, a man with the mind of a child, turned into a serial killer on paper because the state needed a monster. Before he became a name in crime history, Bruno Lüdke was exactly the kind of person a dictatorship finds easiest to use: poor, uneducated, and defenseless. He was born on April 3, 1908, in Köpenick, a working-class suburb on the edge of Berlin. He was the fourth of 6 children in the family of Otto and Emma Luedke, who ran a small laundry business. From early childhood, it was clear that Bruno was different. At school, he struggled with reading, writing, and counting. He fell behind the other children and could not follow more complex lessons. Teachers considered him slow and easily confused. Eventually, he was removed from regular classes and sent to a special school for children with learning disabilities. He finished it in 1922 with no qualifications and no trade. After school, his life shrank to a few streets. He went straight into the family business, doing basic manual work, washing, carrying, loading. He did not travel, did not serve in the military, did not build a career. He simply stayed in Köpenick, doing whatever simple tasks his parents gave him. In 1937, his father died of throat cancer. Bruno took over the delivery side of the business. Every day he hitched a horse to a wooden cart, loaded it with bundles of laundry, and drove through the neighborhood. The cart was clearly marked Luedke Laundry in big letters. Everyone in Köpenick saw him, knew his name, and knew that he was Dumb Bruno, the harmless, slow delivery boy. His mother paid him 50 pfennigs a day and 1 Reichsmark on Sundays. He smoked a pipe, occasionally drank beer, but he was not a known drunk or fighter. He had no close friends, no girlfriend, no wife, and no children. Socially, he was almost invisible, present in the streets, absent from any circle of influence. The local police knew him mostly because he was bad at stealing. He stole firewood and tried to sell it. He walked into a cafe with someone else's duck under his arm and tried to sell it for 15 Reichsmarks. Another time he tried to sell a stolen rooster. For that, he spent short stretches in custody. But even in their internal reports, the police described him not as a dangerous offender, but as a mentally limited man whose petty crimes came from stupidity, not malice. One detail is crucial. In all available records from before 1943, there is no allegation that he attacked any person. No assaults, no sexual offenses, no violent outbursts. Until the murder of Frieda Rössner, Bruno is a poor, mentally impaired laundry worker with a history of clumsy thefts, not a man who fits the profile of a calculated killer moving around the country unnoticed. That will not protect him. In a system that has already decided he is defective, it will only make him easier to sacrifice. In 1938, a minor complaint sends Bruno into the heart of Nazi racial policy. Someone reports him for whipping his horse too hard while driving the laundry cart. The case is small, but the timing is deadly. The regime is deep into its eugenics program, classifying citizens by their value to the nation. Bruno is ordered to undergo a medical evaluation. The doctors are not there to help him. They are there to decide what category he belongs to. The questions they ask are simple, but for someone with his limitations, they are traps. How many minutes are there in an hour? He says he doesn't know. How many days are there in a year? He doesn't know that either. When they ask him to recite the alphabet, he stops around the letter F. He can name Adolf Hitler as our Führer, but he cannot place earlier leaders correctly. The examiners conclude that he is physically healthy, but mentally deficient from birth. In their report, they state that he cannot handle complex tasks, that he barely reads and writes, and that he is suited only for simple work. For Bruno, this is nothing new. His life already reflects that. For the Nazi state, it is a label with legal consequences. In January 1939, a special hereditary court reviews his file under the law for the prevention of offspring with hereditary diseases. The logic is brutal. People like Bruno should not have children because the regime considers them a burden on the nation. The court orders his forced sterilization. On May 22, 1940, the operation is performed in a Berlin hospital. There is no meaningful consent. Bruno does not truly understand what is being done to him or why. He is poor, poorly educated, and mentally impaired, exactly the kind of person least able to defend himself against decisions made in distant offices. After the procedure, he goes back to Köpenick, back to the horse, the cart, and the bundles of laundry. On the surface, nothing changes. But in the eyes of the state, he has crossed a line. He is officially classified as defective, someone whose body and future can be altered without his agreement. 3 years later, when a woman from his delivery route is murdered, this status will make it very easy for the police to decide that he is the perfect suspect, and even easier for the system to make sure he never tells his side of the story. On January 29, 1943, winter has Berlin in its grip. Food is scarce, coal is rationed, and many people rely on firewood just to keep their homes livable. That afternoon, 59-year-old widow Freda Rustner leaves her house in Köpenick and walks into a nearby forest to collect wood. It is a short route she has taken many times before. She does not return. When evening falls and she is still missing, concern grows. Over the next 2 days, searchers comb the forest. Eventually, they find her body. She is lying in the snow. She has been strangled with her own scarf. Her clothing shows signs of disturbance that point to a sexual motive. Her purse is there, but 1 Reichsmark is missing. Frieda is not a stranger in Bruno's life. She is one of the regular customers of Luedke Laundry. Bruno has been to her home many times, picking up dirty linen and bringing back clean bundles. He knows her face, her house, her routine. In any investigation, this kind of connection makes him a person of interest. On its own, it is a reason to ask questions, not a reason to end them. The Berlin Homicide Department sends a small team to Köpenick to handle the case. At the top is Criminal Commissar Heinrich Franz. He is under pressure from his superiors and from the political climate. The Nazi state does not like unsolved crimes, especially not in the capital during a war. For about 7 weeks, the case goes nowhere. The team interviews residents, questions several men, and briefly detains a few suspects. No solid evidence emerges. There is no weapon recovered that can be tied to a suspect, no forensic trace that points to one man over another. On paper, the file still reads, "Unknown Offender." On March 18, 1943, Franz changes that with one decision. He arrests Bruno Lüdke. The official justification is thin. There is no physical evidence, no eyewitness putting Bruno with Freda in the forest. In his report, Franz writes that, after talking to Bruno at his workplace, he gained the impression that Bruno knew more than he was saying. For an educated, politically protected detective, an impression is a vague note. For a mentally disabled laundry boy in a dictatorship, it is a trap snapping shut. From this moment on, Bruno is no longer a village fool with a record of petty theft. In the eyes of the system, he is a suspect in a sexual murder, and about to become something much worse. Heinrich Franz is not just a name on a report. He is the architect of the entire case. As a homicide detective in Berlin and a member of the SS, he operates in a world where police work and ideology overlap. His superiors expect results. The regime expects proof that crime is under control even in wartime. By 1943, Germany is losing on the Eastern Front. The image of strength at home becomes more important than ever. For Franz, an unsolved murder is not just a failure of investigation, it is a potential stain on his loyalty and competence. Solving the killing of a widow in Köpenick would be useful. Solving dozens of murders at once would be spectacular. When he looks at Bruno, he does not see a man who can fight back. He sees a man the state has already reduced to an object, mentally deficient on paper, forcibly sterilized, socially isolated, known to the police, and with no one influential to speak for him. In other words, the perfect person to carry any story that needs a human face. Franz quickly takes complete control of the interrogation process. He is the one who questions Bruno. Other officers may be present, but the dynamic is always the same. One educated, uniformed authority figure asking the questions, and one confused, frightened man trying to understand what is happening. Franz uses a mix of pressure and false kindness. Bruno is given cigarettes, food, and attention when he appears cooperative. He is confronted, corrected, and according to later accounts, sometimes beaten when he resists. Over time, Bruno starts to see Franz as the central figure in his life, a powerful man who can punish or reward him, someone whose approval he desperately wants. In that situation, a confession stops being a simple statement of facts. It becomes a survival strategy and a way to preserve that fragile bond. When the person who controls your food, comfort, and future keeps insisting that you remember something, and you are terrified of making him angry, the pressure to say yes becomes enormous. For Franz, every yes is a step toward what he truly wants, a story he can sell upwards. Not, We caught someone for one murder, but we uncovered a hidden monster who has been killing for 15 years. In a system built on numbers and narratives, that kind of result is pure gold. Once Bruno has admitted to killing Freda under pressure, Franz does not stop at one case. He sees a chance to clean up the homicide statistics of half a country. The method he uses is methodical and deeply manipulative. First, he goes to the archives. There, he selects unsolved murders of women, bodies found in forests, fields, rivers, or lonely roads, often with signs of sexual assault or robbery. These cases are scattered across different regions and years. Some are more than a decade old. All share one thing: the real killer was never found. Franz studies these files in detail. He memorizes places, dates, wound patterns, stolen items, and the smallest unique details that would make a confession sound convincing. Then he returns to Bruno with carefully chosen questions. Have you ever been to this town? Do you remember being in this forest? Did you once meet a woman on this road? At first, Bruno's answers are often negative. He says he has never been there. He has never seen that place. He does not remember such a woman. At that moment, he is still telling the truth. But the questioning does not end. The same topics come back, sometimes more aggressively, sometimes wrapped in offers of cigarettes or sympathy. Other officers later recall that Bruno sometimes appeared at interrogations with bruises on his face. Bruno himself says more than once that the police will kill him if he does not confess. Under such conditions, fear, dependence, and isolation, his answers begin to shift. No becomes I don't know. I don't know becomes maybe. Maybe becomes yes, I was there. Once that door is open, Franz pushes further. What did you do then? Where did you grab her? What did you take? To make the confession sound more credible, Franz starts taking Bruno to the crime scenes themselves. They put him on trains, move him across Germany, and walk him through forests and fields tied to cold cases. Once there, the questions become even more leading. Show us where you met her. Show us where she fell. If Bruno goes the wrong way, he is corrected. If he cannot remember a detail, he is reminded of what the file already says. One interrogation illustrates how artificial this process is. Franz asks Bruno how he bought a train ticket. Bruno answers vaguely that he asked for a ticket to there and there. Franz demands a specific destination. Bruno says he will think about it overnight. The next day, he confidently says he bought a ticket to Silesia. Franz points out that Silesia is a region, not a city. Bruno simply answers, I call it a city. In Franz's final report, this exchange is transformed into proof of Bruno's remarkable geographical knowledge. Years later, when a criminologist is allowed to compare the raw interrogation notes with Franz's polished reports, he finds a pattern. Bruno's real statements are short, hesitant, and often wrong. The reports turn them into long, detailed, coherent confessions. Sometimes Franz clearly picks a case first and then steers Bruno until he can claim it as solved. By the end of this process, Franz has collected enough confessions to claim that Bruno killed 85 women and that 51 unsolved murders can now be closed. On the surface, it looks like spectacular police work. In reality, a frightened, mentally disabled man has been turned, line by line, into the perfect serial killer on paper. Behind each of those 51 cleared cases is a real victim and a real family. Paperwork might be satisfied with a name written in the offender column, But for the people who lost someone, the truth matters. In the Luedke case, many of them never get it. Frieda Rössner is one example. Her murder is the anchor for the whole narrative. Without a proven killer, her family would live with uncertainty. With Bruno's forced confession, they are told a simple story. The man who delivered her laundry also took her life. For them, the feeling of closure is based on a confession that was never tested in court. In other cases, the sequence is even more disturbing. Some families had already gone through the process of a trial. Other men had been arrested, prosecuted, and convicted for certain murders that later appear on Bruno's list of confessions. When his statements are accepted, those convictions are quietly overturned and the men are released. On the surface, this looks like justice correcting its mistakes. Underneath, it raises a disturbing possibility. If the system was capable of convicting the wrong men once, why should its new solution, based almost entirely on one manipulated suspect, be trusted? For the victims themselves, the result is the same. Once their names are linked to Bruno, their cases are considered solved. The files are moved from the open shelf to the closed shelf. No one continues to look for the man who actually attacked them. Whoever he was, he walks away, protected by the fiction of Germany's worst serial killer. In that sense, these women are betrayed twice. First, by the unknown men who assaulted and killed them. Second, by a police system that used their deaths to build a convenient myth instead of doing the harder work of finding the real killers. The human cost of that decision is not just Bruno's life. It is decades of silence over 51 murders that were never truly resolved. If you strip away the drama and look at the Luedke case as a cold investigator would, the gaps are impossible to ignore. Start with evidence. Across all the murders assigned to Bruno, there is no secure forensic link, no confirmed fingerprints, no identified hair or blood, no weapon tied to him, no stolen items found in his possession that can be traced to a specific victim. For someone accused of dozens of killings, that absence is striking. Then there is the question of movement. The official story claims Bruno traveled the country for years, killing women in distant regions, and then returning to his normal life in Köpenick without attracting any attention. This does not fit the reality of wartime Germany. Train travel required tickets and checks. Police patrols watched for deserters and escaped forced laborers. A man of limited intellect making frequent long solo trips across the Reich would leave some trace, yet none appears. The pattern of the murders also does not look like the work of a single offender. Real serial killers, especially those with such high victim counts, usually display a consistent modus operandi. Similar victim types, similar locations, similar methods. In the cases pinned on Bruno, the victims vary in age and background. The settings differ, and the methods of killing are not consistent. Even the Central Criminal Police authorities struggle to demonstrate a logical link between many of these crimes beyond a woman was killed and the real killer was never found. Finally, there are the internal doubts. Not every officer who met Bruno believed he was a mastermind murderer. Some noted how easily he agreed with suggestions, how often his memories only became accurate after being corrected. There are hints of discomfort in the files, but under a dictatorship, questioning a big success is dangerous. Those doubts remain buried in the background, overshadowed by the impressive statistics that Franz delivers. Taken together, these elements flip the logic of the case. Instead of evidence pointing naturally towards Bruno as the culprit, It looks as if Bruno was chosen first, and the evidence was then bent, stretched, or ignored to fit that choice. The case against him is strong only if you accept every confession at face value and refuse to ask how those confessions were produced. At a certain point, the Bruno Lüdke story becomes a problem even for the regime that created it. On paper, it is perfect. An imbecilic monster exposed by skilled detectives, dozens of unsolved murders finally cleared up, a demonstration of police power in the middle of a war. But the more you look at Bruno himself, the harder it is to present him in a courtroom as a fully responsible criminal. German law at the time contained a provision that people who were seriously mentally impaired could not be held responsible in the same way as healthy adults. Bruno's earlier classification as mentally deficient now collides with the image of a calculating serial killer. A public trial would make that contradiction impossible to hide. In an open courtroom, a defense lawyer could question the confessions, highlight the lack of physical evidence, and challenge the interrogation methods. Witnesses who saw Bruno struggle with simple questions might be called. The fact that he had been forcibly sterilized as a defective person could become a central issue. The risk for the authorities is obvious. The entire case could unravel under public scrutiny. For the Nazi leadership, that is unacceptable. They want the benefits of the story, the numbers, the sense of control, the myth of a monster destroyed, without the danger of exposing the weaknesses in their own system. The solution is to remove Bruno from the legal process entirely. He is declared mentally ill and transferred to a criminal medical institute in Vienna controlled by the SS. Officially, this is for observation and treatment. In practice, it means he is taken out of the ordinary justice system and placed in an environment where doctors and officers answer more to ideology than to law. Behind closed doors, someone makes a decision. Bruno cannot be allowed to walk free, but he also cannot be allowed to testify in court. The safest option is to ensure he never appears before a judge at all. In a state that already sterilized him without consent, moving one step further is brutally simple. In late 1943 or early 1944, Bruno arrives in Vienna. For him, it is just another transfer he does not fully understand. The faces are new, the corridors different, but the logic is the same. He is a powerless man in the hands of people who decide everything for him. There is no trial schedule, no lawyer visits, no preparation for a hearing. Instead, he is treated as a subject of observation, a living file, more interesting for what he represents than for who he is. In the SS medical system, experiments on prisoners and asocial individuals are not unusual. The boundaries between medicine and punishment are blurred. On April 8, 1944, Bruno Lüdke dies in custody. The cause is a chemical injection. There is no record of a formal death sentence preceding it, no transcript of a judge pronouncing a verdict, no appeal, no last statement, no public record of his side of the story. His life is ended by the same state that labeled him defective, sterilized him, and then wrote him into the role of Germany's greatest serial killer. He dies at 35. The man who, according to police records, committed 85 murders is himself killed without a single murder conviction. For a system that claimed to stand for order and justice, it is a revealing ending. The monster it created is too fragile to withstand open examination, so it is removed in silence. For the official statistics, nothing changes. The 51 murders assigned to him remain solved. The myth remains intact. Only the one person who might have described what really happened in those interrogation rooms is gone forever. After the war, the Third Reich falls, but its stories do not disappear overnight. The idea of Bruno Lüdke as a monstrous serial killer continues to circulate. It fits a certain narrative. Even in a strict, militarized society, evil can hide in plain sight until the police finally uncover it. In 1957, the myth is given new life on the big screen. The film Nachts, wenn der Teufel kam, The Devil Strikes at Night, is released in West Germany. Loosely based on the Lüdke case, it presents a character inspired by Bruno as a real serial killer. He is shown as a dangerous, predatory figure, and the story builds around a detective trying to stop him. The film is successful and critically acclaimed. For many viewers, it becomes the definitive version of the story. What the film does not show is the manipulation behind the confessions, the absence of hard evidence, the legal problems, and the fact that Bruno was killed without a trial. Cinema needs clear lines: a victim, a villain, a hero. Bruno is cast once again as the villain. Within the police and among some legal professionals, doubts remain. Officers like criminal Rat Faulhaber, who saw the case up close, are uneasy about how the investigation was conducted and how weak Bruno is intellectually. But in a country busy rebuilding and confronting much larger horrors of the Nazi era, the fate of one poor disabled man from Köpenick does not become a priority. It is not until the 1990s that the foundation of the myth is seriously challenged. A Dutch criminologist and former police chief gains access to the original case files, interrogation notes, reports, internal correspondence. He studies them not as a storyteller, but as an investigator. Again and again, he sees the same pattern: leading questions, corrections, contradictions, and confessions that only become accurate after detectives feed Bruno the information. His conclusion is blunt. There is no reliable proof that Bruno committed any of the murders he confessed to. The image of him as a serial killer is, in his view, a product of police manipulation under a totalitarian regime. The real killers in more than 50 cases were never identified. Even with that, the cultural image is slow to change. Once a person has been branded a monster for decades, it takes time and effort to persuade the public that the monster might have been a victim instead. For most of the 20th century, Bruno remains trapped between two identities: in popular culture, the worst serial killer in Europe; in emerging research, a likely scapegoat. There is no official act clearing his name. The court that could have judged him never sat. The state that killed him never admitted a mistake. Then, nearly 80 years after his death, the city where he lived takes a small, symbolic, but important step. In 2021, in Berlin-Köpenick, a brass memorial stone is set into the pavement in front of his former home. It is a Stolperstein, a stumbling stone, part of a project that commemorates victims of Nazi persecution by marking the last freely chosen residents. The inscription is simple. It says, "Here lived Bruno Lüdke, born 1908, forcibly sterilized in 1940, arrested in March 1943, sent to a criminal medical institute in Vienna in December 1943, killed there in April 1944. There is no mention of serial killer. The emphasis is entirely on what the state did to him. At the ceremony unveiling the stone, actor Mario Adorf, who once played a character based on Bruno in a film, is present. Over the years, he has publicly argued that the real Bruno was more victim than villain. Now the city itself is quietly acknowledging the same thing. Whatever he did or did not do, he was a man whose basic rights were stripped away and whose life was ended by a regime that needed him more as a symbol than as a human being. The Stolperstein does not answer the most painful questions. It does not tell us who actually killed Frieda Rössner in the Köpenick forest in January 1943. It does not name the men who attacked the other women whose cases were closed on Bruno's back. It cannot give their families the truth they were denied. What it does is force us to look down, literally, at a name in the street and remember that a person once walked there, worked there, lived there, and was then taken away. It forces us to confront how easily a state can create a monster when it controls the files, the reports, and the narrative. In the end, the horror of the Bruno Lüdke case is not a story about what one man did in the darkness of forests and alleys. It is a story about what a powerful system did in bright offices and interrogation rooms. Bruno died carrying, on paper, the guilt for 85 murders. In the documented reality of his life before the arrest, the worst things he certainly did were steal firewood, a duck, and a rooster. Between those two images lies the reason this story still matters. If a poor disabled delivery boy can be turned into Germany's greatest serial killer by the stroke of a pen, then every statistic, every confession, and every solved case in a dictatorship deserves to be questioned. And somewhere behind his name, now engraved in brass on a Berlin sidewalk, there are 51 women whose killers are still unknown, and whose stories were buried under the convenient invention of a monster that almost certainly never existed.